The Pacific Coast Highway of California tracks along the planet's largest ocean. Drivers get a seaward gaze unblocked by land for thousands of miles. But Highway 1 also travels along the edge of American culture. It cuts through land transformed by humans and land that hasn't changed for millennia. In some parts of California, Highway 1 is the only way through. And some days, nature tries its hardest to keep you from passing at all. The road heads straight into the heart of America's left coast, a city born overnight with the gold rush that boasts America's most iconic bridge and most notorious prison. The Pacific Coast Highway is one of the world's most scenic drives. But the road is more than that. It's a pilgrimage, a reconnection to California's history, its nature, its mythology. Today, we're going to take that journey from the air. A journey through the spirit of California, through the spirit of America. Some call it the most beautiful drive in the world. California's Highway 1, also called the Pacific Coast Highway, runs nearly the length of the state. But some of the most stunning stretches of the road wind from San Simeon in the south up through Big Sur to San Francisco and to Point Reyes, one of the most dangerous sections on the San Andreas Fault. We start our journey along the Pacific Coast Highway in San Simeon. It was here, thousands of feet above the Pacific, that a young boy with dreams larger than life spent his summers camping. And it was here that he returned, 50 years later, a newspaper magnate, to build a palace to rival the greatest in Europe. Hearst Castle. William Randolph Hearst owned all of this land. His estate covered an area half the size of Rhode Island. Hearst was the Rupert Murdoch of the early 20th century. Through his 36 newspapers, he tried to control the country's political agenda. And at Hearst Castle, he entertained the powerful and luminous. Before Highway 1 was built, his guests had to arrive by boat. Once on the castle's private drive, they'd see Hearst's zoo loose upon the hills: antelopes, zebras, bison, camels, kangaroos, even giraffes. Guests included Hollywood's elite: Charlie Chaplin, Clark Gable, Joan Crawford, Cary Grant. Stars came to Hearst Castle. They had little choice. Turn down an invitation from Hearst and your career could be over. Hollywood director Orson Welles found the tycoon in his castle an irresistible target. His 1941 film Citizen Kane was set at a palace called Xanadu, where a ruthless tyrant lived with his talentless second wife. Hearst retaliated by nearly ruining Welles' career. The castle itself is modeled after a medieval cathedral Hearst had admired in Spain. George Bernard Shaw said, "It was the place God would have built if he had the money." Hearst's guests stayed in chateaux surrounding the main house. Hearst's bedroom was at the front of the castle, between the two towers and overlooking the Pacific. His mistress's bedroom was just next door. Altogether, the estate is a hodgepodge of European styles, a mosaic of Hearst's memories and obsessions. He spent 30 years and millions of dollars building this estate. Hearst died before it was completed. And after his death in 1951, the castle was donated to the state of California. Now more than 1 million people visit every year. You can even throw your own private party for $16,000. Behind San Simeon, Lake Nacimiento and the wine country of Paso Robles offer a refuge from big city life. This winding waterway is actually one of the state's top recreational lakes. Engineers dammed the Nacimiento River in the 1960s, creating a reservoir with 165 miles of shoreline and countless coves. Its calm, temperate waters make it ideal for water skiing. There's no speed limit on the lake, making it slightly dangerous, but heaven for anything that revs. The greatest attraction might be the feisty white bass. These voracious fish aren't native to California, making it unlawful to introduce them to most of California's waters. But white bass are allowed at Lake Nacimiento, where there's no way out, except on a fisherman's line. A little further inland, the oak-covered foothills give way to the farmland of Paso Robles. Once covered in cattle and vegetables, acre after acre in Paso Robles is increasingly staked with grapevines. The region just south of Paso was featured in the 2004 movie Sideways. That film turned vineyards growing Pinot Noir into stars overnight. Sales of the wine shot up 70% across the country. But Paso itself is the new star of the Central Coast wine explosion. It's the fastest growing region in California's $3 billion wine industry. Vineyards have been in production here since the late 19th century, but most often, grapes were shipped north to the wineries of Sonoma and Napa Valley. But in the 1980s, more vineyards in Paso started making their own wine. And within the last decade alone, the number of winemakers has tripled here. Some 26,000 acres of vineyards now feed 170 local wineries. It takes 6 to 8 clusters of grapes to produce a bottle of wine. That's about 200 grapes a glass. Big Reds are Paso's signature: Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, and Zinfandel. Heat and limestone are the keys. A long growing season with vines fed by limestone-rich hills makes for muscular, powerful wines. Farmers have transformed the land and economy of California, but nature hasn't entirely surrendered the coast. Fog is never far from the Pacific Coast Highway. On summer days, it shrouds the road. Sometimes, the fog devours it. It sweeps in from the Pacific as warm summer air from the west hits the cold coastal waters. These waters cool the air flowing over. It condenses into a dense mist and creeps inland, up over the mountains. It's a local pastime to talk about all the different sizes and shapes the fog forms. The fog can sneak up on you, like the American poet Carl Sandburg once described, on little cat feet. Other times, it hits like a dump truck. But you don't need fog to make the drive along Big Sur treacherous. Some of the most dangerous twists on Highway 1 are here, where the Santa Lucia Mountains crash into the sea. This 90-mile coastline is a rocky world of cliffs and waterfalls. Millions of years of seismic action have shaped Big Sur. Tectonic plates under tremendous pressure are grinding against each other here, constantly pushing the mountains toward the sky. Highway 1 is the only way through Big Sur. In some places, the road was blasted out of the mountainside. In other places, Highway 1's engineers made old roads obsolete, casting bridges across canyons. The most famous is Bixby Creek Bridge, the location of an untold number of car commercials. Bixby is one of the world's highest single-arch bridges. It rises 260 feet above the canyon floor and stretches more than 700 feet across. It's a feat of engineering, built into walls of crumbling granite. Highway 1 opened here in 1937, but Big Sur remains relatively uninhabited. Just a few thousand people live here. And its shoreline looks much like it did when the first Spanish explorers set sight on it hundreds of years ago. It's a fearful-looking coast from the sea. One of the most dangerous spots is Point Sur. But since the late 19th century, this lighthouse has helped protect mariners. It sits on volcanic rock, and until Highway 1 was built, it was a pretty isolated existence for the lighthouse keepers. They were more likely to get a visit from a prehistoric animal than the mailman. Once upon a time, California condors made terrifying descents down these cliffs. They flew on huge black wings, 10 feet wide, from tip to tip. And at the bottom, swarms of condors would rip into the carcasses of whales. Condors flew these hills for millions of years, until they disappeared in the 1950s. But a zoo breeding program has brought the condor back. Sightings are still extremely rare, yet every so often, a driver along Highway 1 can peer down and see North America's largest bird once again feasting at the shore. Just up the coast from Big Sur is Carmel. It was here that an 18th century priest ended a journey that took him through hundreds of miles of wilderness. In 1771, Father Junipero Serra chose Carmel as the headquarters for what would become a string of 21 Spanish missions. These missions cemented Catholic Spain's control over California. Carmel is far from wild these days. Tourists come for the Tony art galleries and boutiques. Town laws are strict. If you hit a tree with a car and leave the scene, you could be charged with hit and run. Hollywood tough guy Clint Eastwood loosened things up a bit during a brief stint as mayor in the 1980s. Eastwood overturned a town rule forbidding people to eat ice cream cones on the street. Outside of Carmel, a community of nuns with traditions stretching back to medieval times has built a house of worship. They petitioned to build the monastery here after a nun in their order was made a saint in 1925. Although Highway 1 passes right in front of it, the monastery remains a quiet home for these nuns living in seclusion. North of Carmel, a two-lane road veers off from the Pacific Coast Highway and out toward the sea. For 17 miles, the road winds around cypress trees and golf courses of the Monterey Peninsula. Some say it was this rugged coastline that inspired Robert Louis Stevenson's 19th century pirate tale, Treasure Island. Whatever pirates there may have been have long since vacated. These days, the peninsula is rich with golfer's gold. The 17-mile drive is home to several top courses. Their draw is due in part to their varied terrain: sand dunes, marshes, and thick forests. But the real treasure here is at the southern end of the peninsula. Pebble Beach. Opened in 1919, it takes the best elements from courses around the world. Every inch of Pebble Beach is said to be perfect. There are no ordinary holes here, and the holes along the mighty Pacific are standouts. At 106 yards, the downhill 7th is one of the shortest holes. But don't be misled, it's also one of the most difficult in golf. With bunkers all around and a fierce ocean wind, it takes a sensitive touch on this tightly trapped green. Anyone can play these fabled links. It's a public course. Just make reservations a year in advance and be ready to pay $500 a round. Golfers playing at the northern end of the peninsula have a perfect view of Monterey Bay. But these tranquil surface waters hide an astounding world. Just offshore, the ocean floor abruptly drops off. It's the head of an underwater chasm as deep as the Grand Canyon. The canyon snakes for nearly 300 miles out to sea. At its deepest, it reaches down 2 miles. Ocean currents send nutrient-rich waters through the canyon and right into the bay, making it one of the richest ocean feasting grounds in the world. So a good long stop at Monterey Bay is a must for migrating animals. The world's largest mammals spend their summers here. Blue whales. Hundreds start showing up late June to gorge on krill. These Rizzo's dolphins come for the squid. They're large compared to other dolphins. They like to swim in groups of about 30 and rarely come close to shore. And unlike blue whales, these dolphins stick around here all year round. These waters offer no shortage of mysteries for scientists at the world-renowned Monterey Bay Aquarium. Its gray buildings sit on the end of Cannery Row, a strip made famous by John Steinbeck. For Steinbeck, Cannery Row was bursting with character. He described the strip in his novel as a grating noise, a poem, a habit, a nostalgia, and a stink. That stink was the smell of sardines, millions of them caught in the bay and slapping down chutes into the canneries in the 1930s. The sardine industry here collapsed by the end of the 1940s, and Steinbeck's short strip of honky-tonks and whorehouses has long since cleaned up. In their place, much sought after, oceanfront property. Behind Monterey Bay, a blanket of farms stretches for 100 miles. It's Salinas Valley, the salad bowl of America. In the late 1940s, an aspiring actress came through here, having just been dumped from a movie contract. She took a job modeling for a local jewelry store. The local Artichoke Association thought that was a waste of her talents. So they decided on the spot to crown her Miss Artichoke Queen. That actress was Marilyn Monroe. Agriculture is California's biggest industry, and Salinas is the heart of it. Almost all of America's artichokes are grown here. This valley also boasts over 80% of America's lettuce and half of the nation's cauliflower, mushrooms, and broccoli. Salinas alone is a $3.5 billion farm economy. But this valley has seen its share of hard times. Steinbeck wrote about it in his epic, The Grapes of Wrath. After the book was published, he was vilified in his hometown for taking the side of Dust Bowl-era migrant workers. Salinas eventually forgave Steinbeck. And few people here would disagree with him when he said Salinas was the most beautiful place on earth. He called its land the pastures of heaven. Up the bay from Salinas, Highway 1 drives you straight into quintessential California beach culture, starting with the classic surf town, Santa Cruz. The counterculture moved into the town in 1965 when the new University of California campus opened its doors. The school's mascot is a local resident, the banana slug. Santa Cruz has always had a laid-back attitude and a focus on fun. Developers wanted this to be the Coney Island of the West. The Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk is the oldest seaside amusement park on the West Coast. It's 100 years old and counting. California beach bums love the sands of Santa Cruz. And at first glance, these northern elephant seals at Ano Nuevo seem to share the laid-back attitude. During the molting season, they nap all day. But appearances can be deceiving. These seals are resting before an epic voyage. For 8 straight months, some will swim halfway across the Pacific and back in search of food. Molting season is R&R time. Construction of the Pacific Coast Highway in the 1930s and 40s changed the fortunes of many towns. The scenic route detoured traffic around some, ending their booms overnight. For others, it runs right through. It transformed the isolated coastal town of Half Moon Bay into a destination spot worthy of a Ritz-Carlton and the Half Moon Bay Golf Links. For hundreds of years, European explorers searched this coastline for California's fabled cities of gold. And yet, the treasure hunters kept missing the entrance to one of the world's finest natural harbors, the Golden Gate. It was hidden for so long because this is what explorers would see: a rocky shoreline, turbulent waters, and no hint of an opening. The bay opens up 3 miles back from the Pacific. Its entrance is only a mile wide, hard to spy from the sea. In fact, it was a land expedition that finally spotted the entrance from nearby hills, 230 years after the first Spanish ship sailed by. A 19th century army captain gave the passage its name, Golden Gate. Today, anyone entering the bay by sea must pass under San Francisco's most iconic structure, the Golden Gate Bridge. It's hard to imagine now, but before the bridge was built, the only way across the bay was by ferry. Boats carried 50,000 commuters a week. It's no wonder the biggest opposition to the bridge came from ferry boat operators. But at last, in 1930, the voters of San Francisco gave engineer Joseph Strauss the green light. Strauss said he dreamed of building the biggest thing of its kind that a man could build. His design ranks with the Empire State Building and Brooklyn Bridge as a symbol of American progress and ingenuity. The entire bridge is 1.7 miles long. Its towers rise 746 feet above the bay. To build a similar bridge today, it would cost over $1 billion. In 1937, the Golden Gate made its debut as the world's longest suspension span. Its 2 main cables reach 4,200 feet from one tower to the other. It's called a suspension bridge because the roadway hangs from the cables. The cables are held up by the 2 towers and anchored at either end of the bridge. And while most bridges at the time were painted black, the Art Deco Golden Gate was painted a reddish orange to catch the light and make it stand out in fog. But there's a dark side to the Golden Gate. It's the world's leading suicide spot. Some call it a monument to death. More than 1,200 people have jumped from the bridge, the first jump 3 months after it opened. It's a 4-second fall, with jumpers hitting the water at 75 miles per hour. The few people who survived hit the water feet first at a slight angle. And survivors say they regretted the jump the second they left the bridge. Tragedy and greatness go hand in hand in San Francisco, a young city perched on the edge of a continent, the edge of a frontier. When gold was found in the nearby hills in 1848, San Francisco exploded. Before, only 10,000 people of European descent lived in all of California. But the gold rush brought hundreds of thousands of people here, all in search of a golden dream. Freedom of spirit, freedom of thought, a freedom to experiment. No American city embodies that more than San Francisco. It's a city that traffics in dissent. Demonstrators have filled its parks, streets, and docks to protest working conditions, civil rights, and war. Its live and let live attitude made it a natural home for the sexual revolution of the 1960s. And soon after, word went out to gay America that this was the place to be. It's also a city of money, with many fortunes won and lost. The late 20th century saw a new surge of pioneers around San Francisco, technology speculators. But when the dot-com bubble collapsed in 2001, hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs, and investors lost trillions of dollars. The city's fortunes are again on the rise as money pours back into the high-tech industry. As far as great cities go, San Francisco is relatively small, with 750,000 residents snuggled onto a 46-mile tip of land. That small size also makes for some of the most expensive real estate in the country. San Francisco has contributed the words beatnik and hippie to the dictionary, but it also gave us yuppie. Despite its international reputation for peace, love, and understanding, the coast of San Francisco for centuries was armored with formidable defenses. More than a dozen military posts surround the mouth of the bay, now preserved in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. They're the largest collection of military installations in the country, many built to defend the city during World War II. Fort Point is at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a pre-Civil War structure, but soldiers stood watch here up through World War II. At its greatest strength, the fort had 100 cannons. The most powerful had a 2-mile range. Preparations for World War II were massive in San Francisco. The coast was set up with a vast network of anti-aircraft guns, underwater mines, observation posts, and air patrols. A historian called the city one giant cannon aimed at the Pacific. But no attacking force ever came close to San Francisco. In the end, World War II left behind another legacy in San Francisco. Soldiers came home feeling disconnected, alienated. After the war, they gathered in the coffee shops and bars around Coit Tower. This neighborhood became a beacon for pacifists, anarchists, and experimental poets. One group became known as the Beats. Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, Neal Cassady, Gary Snyder. They rejected consumerism, corporate culture, and conventional poetry. In 1956, Ginsberg read on these streets what would become the Beat movement's manifesto, Howl. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. Starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. The Beat poets laid the groundwork for San Francisco's next cultural revolution, the Summer of Love. Golden Gate Park and Haight-Ashbury were the epicenter of America's youth culture in 1967. The Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, and the Hells Angels lived here. And tens of thousands of hippies came from all over, shacking up in communal pads around the park. They gathered here to follow psychedelic guru Timothy Leary's advice. Turn on, tune in, drop out. All summer long, the park was filled with music and hippies dancing naked. One recalled, every day was a celebration of life. With flowers in their hair, they were protesting Vietnam and rebelling against the repression of the 1950s. Golden Gate Park and the Haight are still a cultural magnet. The park is also home to a museum at the forefront of California's green movement. The new California Academy of Sciences building is made with recycled materials and powered by sunlight. Its undulating roof will be covered with plants to soak up pollution. It's part of a new generation of buildings that seek to blend in rather than stick out. These giants dwarf the city's Victorian neighborhoods. But even some of these buildings can't stray far from their wild roots. The Transamerica Pyramid sits on top of what used to be a Turkish bath. Here, Mark Twain met a local fireman with a name that later proved useful: Tom Sawyer. The city still has the crookedest street in the world. A resident came up with the idea to help pedestrians and drivers navigate down Lombard Street's dangerously steep hill. Cars are forced to slow to a crawl as they navigate down the 8 turns. Some of the most expensive and distinctive real estate in the city is along this street. This street also caught Alfred Hitchcock's eye. He chose one of the houses on Lombard for Jimmy Stewart's home in Vertigo. While the city's port is no longer commercially important on the West Coast, its Fisherman's Wharf and Pier 39 remain an international magnet. Tourism is now San Francisco's biggest industry, bringing in $7 billion a year. Tourists also make a beeline for the Ghirardelli chocolate factory. Italian Domingo Ghirardelli struck out panning gold in 1849, but hit it big supplying miners with chocolate. One of the city's most crowded ferries leaves from these wharves. Every day, thousands of people head out on a 15-minute ride to a small island in the middle of the harbor: Alcatraz. The federal penitentiary was 22 acres of barren rock. Life here was some of the hardest time prisoners ever did. Many spent their days in isolation. And to look out of their cell windows toward San Francisco's skyline only reminded them of the freedom they'd lost. It drove some prisoners nearly insane. A guard who worked at Alcatraz in the 50s recalled, yachts circled the island and men could see girls in bikinis drinking cocktails. It was so near and yet so far. Alcatraz was a federal experiment. Its criminals weren't America's most murderous. They were the ones the prison system couldn't control. Prisoners most likely to escape. Mobster Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Birdman Stroud, Doc Barker, they were all locked up here. Surrounded by treacherous waters and outfitted with state-of-the-art technology, Alcatraz was supposed to be escape-proof. 36 inmates tried. Of those, 23 were captured. 7 were shot dead. At least 3 drowned. That leaves 3 other prisoners. In 1962, they bored holes through their cell walls using crude electric drills made from stolen parts. With makeshift rafts, they plunged into the water. No trace of the 3 has ever been found. So officially, no one ever escaped from Alcatraz. Alcatraz closed forever as a prison in the 1960s. The site was too expensive to maintain. But the island is busier than ever. Over 1.5 million tourists visit every year. Around the same time the last prisoner was shipped off Alcatraz, San Francisco lost its place as a major world commercial port. In the 1960s, containers revolutionized shipping. But they required vast new loading docks. and San Francisco had run out of room, so its neighbor across the bay, Oakland, took over. Cargo used to be loaded into containers of all kinds, crates, barrels, and bags, and stowed loosely into a ship's hold. These odd sizes meant cargo had to be unloaded by hand. With standardized containers, huge cranes could lift the boxes off ships and put them directly onto trucks. Shipping became faster, cheaper, and far more efficient. Freight companies are building ever bigger ships to carry ever more containers. The largest are over 1,200 feet long, the length of 4 football fields. They carry more than 10,000 containers. Ports like Oakland have to keep up by digging deeper waterways to hold these mega ships. Oakland also has to keep up with a torrent of goods arriving from Asia. More than half of the trade at the U.S.'s 4th busiest port comes from across the Pacific. About 2,000 container ships pass through Oakland every year, carrying nearly 10 million tons of cargo in 1 million containers. The port's 36 cranes have also left a mark on popular culture. They inspired the Imperial Walkers in the movie The Empire Strikes Back. Back out over the bay, over the Golden Gate Bridge, and over the houseboat communities of Sausalito, the Pacific Coast Highway gets wild again. It skirts past the 1,000-year-old redwoods of Muir Woods and travels along the edge of the Point Reyes National Seashore. Point Reyes is a major sanctuary for birds. Nearly half the bird species of North America have been spotted on this triangle of land. But one of the most powerful and dangerous places in the world starts underneath the peninsula, the San Andreas Fault. Here, 2 giants meet. It's where the Pacific tectonic plate grinds up against North America. On April 18, 1906, the plates suddenly sprang against each other at the fault, unleashing the most damaging earthquake in American history. The fault ripped apart here at the shoreline of Stinson Beach and tore north through the center of Tomales Bay. The shaking lasted less than a minute, time enough for this entire peninsula to jump 20 feet north. The lighthouse survived intact. The quake had only knocked the lens off. But in San Francisco, 3,000 people would die. The epicenter of the 7.8 magnitude quake was right outside San Francisco's Golden Gate. The quake triggered a fire that raged for 3 days, destroying some 30,000 buildings. More than 200,000 people were left homeless, nearly half of San Francisco's population. Many who couldn't escape the city camped out in tents at army posts along the headlands. There's a good reason why the #1 fear among San Franciscans is crossing bridges. A 1989 quake collapsed a section of the Bay Bridge. The threat of another massive earthquake here is very much real. It's only a matter of time. Millions of years of tectonic shifts and centuries of pioneers have shaped this land. In just 250 miles from San Simeon to Point Reyes, we've seen the incredible range of California's glories. One of the most spectacular private homes ever built in America. the fabled links of Pebble Beach. Rare glimpses of an underwater world so rich and so deep that it feeds the largest mammals on the planet. In just a 4-hour drive, Highway 1 moves from the ruins of Spanish glory to the haunts of 60s hippies. Through landscapes that seem eternal and ports utterly transformed by 21st century commerce. Past, present, future, they're all here in the place that has so often set the pace for the country. The heart and soul of California.